Welcome everybody to our webinar here for our new version of PrebuiltML and of Estima. And this morning we'll be talking about the new version we sent out, which is 4.11.13.3246 is the latest and greatest on that. And as we get started here, I'll just remind you again of in your webinar controls, you have the ability to send a chat message. And maybe somebody can actually already do that to let me know that you can see my screen and can hear me all right. But you can use that chat message to, if you have a question as we go along the way, maybe we can answer some of those, or if not, we can always follow up with you after the fact as well. So looks like people are seeing things, so that's great. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So starting first over here on the project tab, and specifically the reports area, a small improvement that we've made is when you open a report for the first time, the view is a little bit more zoomed in now. So you hopefully should feel less of a need to, every single time you open a report, to hit the plus button up here and be able to actually even be able to read it. So hopefully it's now at a level that you can do some reading of the report and review it without having to zoom in all the time. If you need a more zoomed out view, you do have the controls here yet to set things back to a page width or a full page view. So if you need to just kind of quickly scroll through things, you also have capability yet. Also with reports, we introduced the idea of being able to have an address show up on your top header line here. So here you can see we have an address line that showed up. This is based on the information that's been entered into the general tab. So you can have that show up both on your PDF export as well as in your Excel report. And the way you would do that is you'll come to a specific report in your Reports tab, choose the Edit button, and you'll now have a checkbox here that says whether or not you want to show the address on your report. And just a reminder for the Publish tab, because I know some of you may have specific ways you use your Excel sheets or your PDFs. If you need to have your PDF have the address on it and your Excel sheet not, you can leverage the Publish tab to help you get those different file types by having different reports produced in different formats and all produced for you at the end of your job with just a click of a button. So if you're not familiar with the Publish tab, you may want to check that out just to see how you can streamline your process more effectively there. But getting back to some of the things in this version, going over to the Notes tab, if you have this version installed and you've done any editing or adding of notes already, you will have seen that we've added in rich text capabilities to the Notes area. So that means that you can select those and all the goodies of bold, italicized, underlined, change the font family, change the font size, change the font color, left and right justified. All of those types of things have now been added in. They're under your capability. So if we make those changes, and if we were to view that report again, then what we should see here is there we've got our additional changes that we've made. So rich text capabilities in Notes, and there's actually a few other places that we've added that in as well that I'll point out along the way. One of them, which is over here in the General tab in the Instructions area. This area is just an internal report area. It doesn't go to any of your final reports or final material lists or layouts. It's just for making notes about a project or a customer that you needed to be aware of. But again, you have the capability here of rich text, so you can really draw attention to things if you want somebody on your team to really pay attention and be aware of something. So rich text capabilities there in the General tab. Shifting over to the Plan tab, several things here. A couple of kind of exciting ones actually, for depending on what your workflow is. But to start with, just a little bit of a UI change up here in the toolbars. You'll notice that some buttons now have these little triangles in the lower right-hand corner, suggesting that there's some more options available. So just to demonstrate what that is all about, if I select something here, if I come up to the Rotate tools, now of course these are there so you can rotate items at a 90-degree angle. but the little arrow, little triangle at the bottom indicates that if I right-click for more options, then I have other ways that I can do it. So I can do it 30 degrees, I can do it 15 degrees. Now, those options aren't new. They've always been there or been there for quite some time, but we've tried to make those options more apparent by adding a little triangle icon in there. So the same thing would be true for up here on your standard tools. Those little triangle icons indicate that if you right-click, there are presets available for those that you have created. In my case here, I haven't created any presets for the linear area tools, so they don't have any triangles at this time. But they would be there if I had created some presets. So be looking for those triangle indicators to be reminders to you of more options that you can leverage in the different processes that you're using. And on that particular note of new options available, that actually comes down to the new pages crop feature. So this button has been here. And the ability to create a new page in your pages list that's based just on a crop of a particular page. So let's say that I just wanted to get this particular area. Old functionality is I can click on the crop as new page button, click one corner, click another corner, and box out an area that I want to have as part of my new page. And it does that. It creates me a new page in the pages list that's only on that area. But let's say that I wanted to have a crop of this page without this area showing, which would have been difficult to do with the crop as new page with just a rectangle. But now, as evidenced by this little triangle here on the crop as new page feature, there's additional options. If I right-click, I can choose the custom shape crop feature for the crop as new page. And in this case, I can just trace around the areas that I actually want to include in my new page. So I can box out or go around that area that I don't want to include. I can still come back over here to include my title bar. I can clip off this corner if I want, so I don't have to have that down in the corner. And when I'm done, I'll just click the End button. And now I have a new page added to my pages list, and it doesn't include that area of the print. So the new feature is the expanded option to be able to have a custom shape crop for your crop as new page feature. Coming back over to upper floor framing here, one of the especially useful features, depending on what your workflow is, that we've added in is the ability to create framing layouts over here from the digitizer. So if you've been using Prebuilt or Estima for a while, you know that typically to create a framing layout, you would need to size down the shape and proportions of the digitizer area so that it best fits the sizes that you need. And then you would go over to the Project tab and to Framing Layouts, and you would create your framing layout by clicking the Capture button. But now, if you may have already seen it, up in the toolbar, we've added in this Capture Framing Layout button here. So now you don't have to size the window down. Instead, you can just click the Framing Layout button, and you can click two corners to define the area that you actually want to capture for that framing layout. So we're going to click here, click there, and it's going to ask me what should we call it. We'll call it the upper floor framing. Click OK. And it's going to give me that framing layout. There we go. So it's already created and it's done. And it's only just to the extents that I had defined with that box. You also notice that the background image is a lighter color. It's not the full strength, even though down here this is. And that's because over here in the framing layouts, my settings have been set to override the page visibility. So as you create framing layouts from the digitizer, the settings that you set over here will still be followed and paid attention to. The same with page size that you see in the preview as it comes up. But in addition to that, following in a similar light to the crop new page feature, we've also added in the capability for you to have a custom shape framing layout area. So let's say I have this larger project, and I've got a bunch of mess here in the center of text that I would really prefer just to not have on my framing layout. So what I can do is I can choose the capture framing layout here from the digitizer, but instead I'm going to right click for more options, and I'm going to choose the custom shape layout. And so now what I'll do is I'll trace around the area that I want to include. But this time, instead of just making a box, I'm going to come down to this section and I'm going to cut in and up and around this text so that it's not going to show up in my framing layout at the end. So I'll finish that, click the camera button to end it. I'll give it a name. Click OK. And I'm going to get my framing layout. Again, it's got the dimmed down background image based on the settings in the framing layout tab. And notice I don't have that center area of all the messy text, and I get a nice clear result. Now, here's a good opportunity, though, to point out how this also interacts with another feature that has existed before, and that's viewport recapture. Let's say that I created my framing layouts, and then I needed to do a revision at a later time. And I need to change the floor joists in this area. I'm going to come in here, come to the member product, and I'm going to change this to some LVL, some micro lamb. So it's going to change that. And so clearly something's changed there. We can see the different color that's gone on. Now I could just create a new framing layout. That would be one way to approach it. But the other option I have is to come over to my framing layouts tab, and I have this option for a viewport recapture. And that button means that it's going to look at the original location of the original framing layout, and it's going to go back to that same location an extents of that framing layout, and it's going to find those again. So even if my digitizer is on a different page, such as this, so it's completely different, if I click the viewport recapture at this point, back over here in the framing layouts tab, it's going to go and it's going to find that location specifically in the digitizer, bring me back to that spot, do the capture, and in addition to that, it also respects this new feature, this capability of being able to box out around areas. So it remembers that custom shape that I created for that framing layout to begin with. So as you use that new feature, you will also probably find it useful to leverage that viewport recapture as you need to update or retake images of the same area. So that's, in a nutshell, you're able to do framing layouts or create framing layouts directly from the digitizer now, and those come in both standard box shapes as well as custom shapes. Getting back over to, I'm going to come back to that same page here, and we're going to move on to talking about some changes that we've made for annotations, being able to mark up your pages. One of the new ones is the border tool, or clouding tools, you might want to think of it. Let's say that I wanted to draw attention because there was some questions of the framing in this particular unit. I can use the annotation tool to trace around this particular unit and draw attention to it. And then I can also set the settings to say I want the border color to be blue, I want the thickness to be 3. I can even change the radius to make it a little bit bigger clouds. And I can get it to look like I want it to. I can even add a fill color too if I wanted it to have a little bit of a fill to it. And if I like that way of drawing things, I can also right click and I can choose save as a preset, and I can call it my blue cloud. So now I can, much like your other presets, instead of having to make those changes all the time, I can come here and I can just start by drawing my blue clouds right away. So that's the clouding tool. And in a similar way, or in a similar fashion, we've made some updates and changes to the annotation note. I'm going to click on the note feature here. And a couple things. First is with annotation notes, we've also added the ability for rich text capabilities. So you can have big notes and small notes here, and you can adjust those accordingly, make these big, change it to a different font, change it to a different color, all the different stuff that you might want to do. Been made available here. We'll click OK. and I can draw my note. But in addition to those changes, you also have the ability now to add a border color. So I'm going to add a border color here, call it red, make my thickness to be 3, and now I have that border on it. And I also have the ability to change that border style from a line to a cloud. So lots of options that we've introduced here in this version for you to be able to mark up, edit, and bring attention to different portions of your plan as you're working on it and wanting to make changes and point those things out to the people you're working with on a particular job. Shifting over to the Profile tab, and this is a good transition to remember that as you use these tools, Cloud tool or the Annotation Note tool, over in the Profile, on the Labeling tab, you do have the ability to set what your standard defaults are. So outside of using presets, you can also say, well, yeah, I want my background of my borders, my border areas that I draw to be blue, and I want my border line to be red generally instead of black. You can set your defaults that are set for those tools. Another feature that we've added in to give you a little bit more control over how the labeling tab is applied. I'm going to come back over to the main floor plan here for a moment just to demonstrate this. Let's say, for example, that I have on this page, I've got these headers, and I wanted to, for this particular job, instead of them being my standard pink color, I wanted them to be this kind of aqua color down here. But after I was working, I remembered that with my porch beam here that I've drawn, I wanted it to have a different prefix and maybe a different color. So I come over to the profile, and I want that to be driven from the labeling tab so it applies everywhere. So I'm going to come down to porch beam. I want this to apply throughout my entire project. So I'll come down to porch beam, and I'm going to change the prefix to HG, and maybe even change the color to be pink like that, or, well, let's do orange. Now previously, if I hit apply, that means that all of the labeling tab is going to be applied to it. So I'll click apply here, applied to the job everywhere. So I've got my HG, I've got my new color, which is great, but my headers that I had previously set to something else, that aqua color, have now been set back on me. So that was the way that it has worked up to this point, but we've added in some additional control for you to have. So let's say again that I set this color of header. I'm going to set it back to that aqua-like color there. But let's say again I want to make a change again to that prefix and suffix and color of porch beam. So I'm going to come back to the profile, come to porch beam, and I'm going to edit this, and we'll say let's change this. And I think the reason that orange color, if you're following along with me, the reason that orange color didn't get applied was because it was coming from a lower level from the product family. But we'll make it app only this time. That way it does get applied orange. And we'll make this KJ for the prefix. And this time, instead of hitting apply, before we do, we're going to uncheck this box. This is the new feature where it's located, is override manual colors to color prefix and suffix. So that means anything that we've manually changed over the digitizer, we've specifically gone in at the digitizer level and said, no, I want you to be this color. If this is checked, it's going to override it. That's the behavior it's always been. But if I uncheck this box, that means that when I apply the labeling tab, anything that I've manually set in the digitizer for its color, its prefix, and its suffix is going to be just left alone. So if that's the behavior you want, then you would uncheck that box, hit apply, come back to the plan, and here I've got my orange and my KJ like we would expect, but my aqua color has been preserved since that was a custom setting that I had set here in the digitizer. So just another level of finesse and control depending on what your needs are as you hit the apply button and make changes to the different look of your projects that you can have. And that was input, or that was as a result of user feedback that we wanted to get that in there for you. And finishing up here, almost done, we're going to come over here to the profile again, to the general tab. a couple of UI changes. If you've been here, you might notice it's a little bit different. So just to show you around real quick, we've moved the logo into its own little box over here, and that applies to both your reports and the layouts. Down here, we've got all the framing layout stuff now kind of organized into one area, which includes the cover sheet page, the title bar image, framing layout styles, your capture resolution, all that's down here, your disclaimer notice, those are all available there. And then up here is the report section. Again, some things that you've already had available to you are there, but then the big new one is this notes page disclaimer. Again, from feedback from users who wanted to have control over what is being put onto that particular notes page. So if I'll hit Control P right now, you'll remember that at the end of your notes page, you get that disclaimer, which has always been hard-coded and you couldn't adjust. But now actually you have control over it, and not only control, but you also have rich text capabilities there as well. So if I wanted to make that 18 in bold, Control P, just to view it again, now I've got that to be 18 in bold. And this is what you see is what you get type of field, so the text wrapping is going to match accordingly. So if I make this big enough that it's going to wrap to the next line, then that is indeed how it's going to look on the report, is looking just like that. So if you don't want a disclaimer, you can actually just delete all the text and Control P the next time you view it. There's no disclaimer. So all that is under your control now. You can set that in your template and have that be what you will. And that brings us to the end here of the different features that we were going to review for this new version. Again, the latest version that you'll want to make sure that you're on is 4.11.13.3246. Thanks again for joining us today, and hope that you have a great afternoon.